5,749 cases of malaria, 1,472 gunshot wounds. Those are the 1st Marine Division's own figures for Guadalcanal, counted to the 10th of December, 1942, while the division was still on the island, still holding Henderson Field, still inside the campaign the planners had named Operation Watchtower, still in the Pacific theater of World War II. Almost none of the sick men died. On that island, the front line settled on a rule of thumb. Unless a man's fever was over 103 degrees, he walked the patrol anyway. Hold both of those at once. The whole story sits in the gap between them. Something filled that division's sick lists nearly 4 times as fast as Japanese gunfire filled its wounded lists. It did that without killing them. But the division the Japanese army could not break stopped being a division anyway. So how does something that kills almost nobody take an army division apart? The answer is in the division's own paperwork. And it is not the story you have been told about the yellow pill. And the worst thing this disease did to an American division on Guadalcanal was not done by a mosquito. It was ordered. If you want the rest of these the same way, document first. Every number checked before it is spoken. Subscribe. That is what this archive is for. Start with the paper, because the paper is public. John Miller Jr. wrote the Army's official history of the campaign in 1949. In his 9th chapter, the malaria figures carry a footnote. It points at 1st Marine Division Report, Volume 5, Annex 10, a running tally the division's own doctors kept of who was carried in and what for. Miller's same chapter counts 3,283 malaria hospitalizations in the month of November alone. Almost nobody quotes it. The numbers that circulate come from a different official history by way of an encyclopedia entry, which is why they are rounder, larger, and about a different set of diseases. Military medicine measures an outbreak in cases per 1,000 men per year. On Guadalcanal, across all services, that rate is 14 in August of 1942. By October, it is 1,664. In November, 1,781. Inside 3 months. And the unit means only what it says. That is 1 month's admissions stretched across a year, not a head count of men. A speedometer reading, not an odometer. What a rate like that does to a division is measurable too. On the 7th and 8th of December, 1942, Navy doctors and Navy corpsmen examined one of the division's regiments and found 34% of it unfit for any duty that might involve combat. In the Army units on the island, about 65% of the men who were ineffective were down with disease, against roughly 25% wounded in action. And that fever rule was never written down as an order. The Marine Corps history calls it a rule of thumb in frontline units. Watch that last one closely. The official history attributes the rule to nobody at all. Robert Joy, an Army Medical Corps colonel who wrote the peer-reviewed account of malaria in the Pacific, cites that same page and firms it into an informal order issued by General Vandergrift. That is a custom becoming a command in one hop, in a peer-reviewed journal. Everything else in this story took the same road, only further. They were leaning on a substitute drug because the quinine was gone twice over. Germany took the Amsterdam stockpile in 1940. Japan took the Java plantations, the cinchona bark that quinine is derived from, in 1942. 2 enemies, 2 years apart, and the first of them happened while America was still neutral. The substitute was atabrine, and it was not captured from the Germans in North Africa. Bayer's chemist made it in the 20s and early 30s, and American Army investigators were testing it in Panama in 1938. Here is the part that takes the floor out from under the story everyone tells. On Guadalcanal, in 1942, there was barely a dose to refuse. The theater put out a directive that August, and the word the directive used was recommended. 0.2 grams, twice a week. Below that, unit medical officers invented their own schedules, and there was no system for reporting which ones worked. The Army's official malaria volume puts it plainly. Some units took quinine, others took atabrine, and many took nothing, and there was no method of the kind developed later for supervising any of it. The standard dose the whole genre treats as the thing brave men defied was settled in the middle of 1943, months after this division had left the island. So what about the punishment? The men held at gunpoint, court-martialed under the Articles of War, punished as if they had thrown away a rifle. None of it is there. Read all 10 chapters of the Army's official malaria volume and the words court-martial, Articles of War, penalty and reprimand never once appear beside atabrine. Doctrine made malaria control a command function, which meant that when a unit's rate climbed, the failure being described was the commander's. The official history names the remedy it believed actually worked, and it is not a punishment. It is an education program to convince each man the drug was worth taking and would not harm him. A curator at the National World War II Museum asked this exact question in print, answers that compliance was left up to the command. There is a famous punishment story. It is real, it is documented, and it belongs to a different army. In Burma, from late 1943, William Slim, commanding the British 14th Army, ran surprise checks on whole units. Every man examined. If a unit came in under 95%, he sacked its commanding officer. In his own words, "I only had to sack 3. By then the rest had got my meaning." Slim sacked commanders. The version that reaches you has privates at gunpoint. The ritual is real too, but it is a year late and a theatre away. There is a letter from Lieutenant Colonel George Duncan to the Surgeon General, dated the 4th of January 1944, describing the atabrine muster in detail no dramatization improves on. Half an inch of water in the canteen cup, no more. 3 feet between men, because crowding in the line lets a man get rid of the tablet. Under no condition is the soldier allowed to help himself. He faces the supervising officer, swallows, drinks the cup dry, and sets the empty cup upside down on the table. Then he gives his name and rank to a checker who ticks him off a roster and stands in a second formation for 5 minutes. Nearly every beat those videos stage from imagination is in that letter, dated 1944, from MacArthur's theatre and a different command, more than a year after Guadalcanal was finished. One thing in the story does survive. The rumour was real. Miller records it from December of 1942. Many men swallowed the tablets reluctantly, if at all, believing they were poison, that they caused impotence, that they stained the skin for good. Where the rumour came from is a separate question, and the answer everyone gives does not survive contact with a calendar. The Army's official history states that the sterility rumour was fostered by the enemy through the broadcast of Tokyo Rose, and gives no source for it at all. The historian Anfao traced the version everyone repeats to a newspaper column. Walter Winchell's Daily Mirror, the 28th of October, 1948, printing a letter from Frank Farrell, a former 1st Marine Division officer. While the case against Iva Taguri was being built, Farrell quoted a broadcast telling the Marines on Guadalcanal that the bitter little pills would turn them yellow for life and leave them unable to make love again. Toguri first went on the air in November of 1943. Farrell was quoting a broadcast made a year before the woman he blamed for it began broadcasting, and nobody has produced that broadcast since. On the island itself, for most of the campaign, nobody was fighting the mosquito at all. Not the Anopheles species that was carrying the disease between men, not any species. No malaria control personnel were permitted onto Guadalcanal until the middle of November. The official history preserves the attitude in the words of one senior officer, unnamed on the page. "We are here to kill Japs, and to hell with mosquitoes. What finally arrived, in November of 1942, was a base malaria control group of 2 Navy officers and 8 Navy enlisted men, 10 men. But the premise under all of it, that this is a story about soldiers refusing medicine, is upside down. The worst malaria disaster attached to this campaign was ordered by doctors. In March of 1943, the American Division, the Army formation raised on New Caledonia, came off Guadalcanal to Fiji, where there is no malaria. On Fiji, its men were deliberately taken off Atta brine. The theory had a name: demalarialization. Let the hidden infections surface where there were beds and no enemy. Treat them and send a clean division back to the war. The infections surfaced. On Guadalcanal, the division's rate had been running somewhere between 1,300 and 2,500 per thousand per year, and the official histories disagree about which. On Fiji, by August, it reached somewhere between roughly 3,700 and 4,200, the same 2 volumes still disagreeing. Robert Joy, writing the peer-reviewed account, uses one word for the result: disaster. They had taken a division off the drug in the one place with no enemy and made it sicker than the island had. Attabrine went back on in November, and by January the rate was 43. Take the 6th Marines. The same lesson at a size a person can hold. Under supervision on Guadalcanal, in January and February of 1943, that regiment reported fewer than 250 cases. Then it moved to New Zealand, stopped the drug, and in May and June reported over 2,500. Attabrine was never the cure the story needs it to be. Against Vivax, the species that took over the sick lists as the campaign receded, it held the infection down while a man kept swallowing it, and let it climb when he stopped. Against Falciparum, kept up long enough, it cured, which is why the number at the top of this matters more than the drama. You can find this subject sold with a title claiming 60,000 malaria deaths in the Pacific. For the entire United States Navy and Marine Corps, across the whole war, the count is 113,256 new cases of malaria and 90 deaths. 94% of cases went back to duty. There is a 60,000 in this story, and it is not a death toll. The official history estimates that more than 3/5 of the 100,000 Allied malaria cases in the South Pacific were probably caught on this one island. Malaria did not kill the Marines who fought here. It emptied them. None of this was hidden. It was counted while it happened by men whose job was to count it. And the paper is not a ratio and not a lesson. It is 5,749 separate times that a Marine came off a line he could still hear, taken out of the war by something he was never issued a weapon against.